Hey guys, I'm coming at you from Shenzhen, and I wanted to make a quick video about who I am and why I view things the way that I do. And perhaps even more important, why I make content. So this is after a lot of people who support my videos have asked me to say a little bit about myself. I mean, before that, there's a lot of people who dislike my content who have asked me also, but it usually accompanies oh, you're a Wumao or you're a CCP shill or something like that. And honestly, that kind of stuff doesn't faze me. But if that's the only argument they have against my points, it's more a reflection that they don't have a point. So here I am today to explain this, and I want to give you some advance notice. Usually when I make my videos, I write out what I want to say in advance, formulate my point, and then make a video. I haven't done that here. This is just kind of on the fly, more like a conversation. So with that in mind, it's going to be a little bit disorganized and I might kind of jump all over the place. But I'll get to my points. And so there's two primary points of why I make this content. One is to kind of offset some of the disinformation out there. I mean, because Hong Kong is a good place. China's a good place too, and for different reasons. Perhaps I'll focus on the Hong Kong part. So, I mean, the Hong Kong part, as I've mentioned in some of my other videos, it's the third freest place on earth. They have, a large percentage of the middle class population has live-in maids. They have free health care. There's so many good things about Hong Kong. They don't have as much political freedom as other people, but they still do have quite a lot. They have district elections, and when you see the people who are getting elected, who are funded by people like Jimmy Lai, who owns Apple Daily, who continually posts xenophobic content, it makes you a little bit concerned about if, when Hong Kong is granted universal suffrage, how much further is that xenophobia and that hate and that pro-American kind of rhetoric that's going on in Hong Kong, how much more will that be institutionalized? And I'm really worried about that. And getting into the universal suffrage issue, I will do a separate video on that. But I want to say, I have experienced the racism, not personally, but I've seen the racism personally in Hong Kong myself. And my wife is mainland Chinese. We've been married for 11 years, 10 years. She better not see this, that I'm having to guess on this one. But when our kids were all born in Hong Kong, and when she was giving birth, if I was not around, you could see when she had to speak either English or Mandarin to medical staff or people, you could see how poorly she was treated. Some of the people were amazing, but there were a lot who were just really, really rude. Like they would just look at her, and then as soon as she started speaking Mandarin, they would walk off and wouldn't say anything to her. And each time she had to go for medical checkups and things like that, she always wanted me to go along with her, because if I was with her, she would get way more respect. And I think a lot of the things that are happening in Hong Kong are basically this racism, this superiority complex coming to the surface, finding an excuse to say we are better than China, we don't deserve to be ruled by China, even though they have a pretty independent system. And by me focusing on that point about the racism and the xenophobia, although I've mentioned it, if I focus on that too much, it's going to be a pretty boring point. So what I can do is I can show you how a lot of the stuff that's going on in Hong Kong is hypocritical and it doesn't make sense. Then you can start to imagine that my theory that a lot of it is based on the superiority complex is a point that becomes a little bit more easier to understand, imagine, and illustrate. So highlighting some of the hypocrisy in Hong Kong ties into that, but it's also just a general dislike of seeing all of this fake news, seeing all of this really misguided content that people overseas are following to get their opinion on Hong Kong is just really annoying, and I want to counteract that. And on to the xenophobia point. This kind of starts to tie into my second point about why I do what I do. I've been living here. So first, a bit about me. So I'm mixed race. My father is British. My mother's from South America. And I was born in England, but grew up in Canada from a very young age. And I've been living in Hong Kong and China for the past 11 years. So I feel like I've got a pretty good view on, various systems and a pretty good global view of what I like about various systems and what I dislike about various systems. Now, it's interesting that most people say that because I'm in China, and yes, I own a business in China also, that's what discredits me. It's like, well, who does have credit then? I mean, I've experienced all the systems. I've been living in Hong Kong. I've been living in China. I mean, that's exactly the kind of person you'll say, well, what's your opinion on this? But no, if you're overseas, they say, what would you know about the situation? If you're in China, they'd say, of course you would say this. And if you're in Hong Kong, they'd beat the crap out of you for voicing your opinion against the protesters. So basically, nobody who has a pro-China or pro-Hong Kong establishment, whatever you want to say, any voice in that direction gets to get heard because they just focus on discrediting you. And I do not get any special treatment in China for my business for doing what I do. I mean, in fact, the authorities visited my brew pub not too long ago, and the FDA has changed some rules, and I'm having a really hard time with that. But it's, you know, I'm not getting any special treatment from doing what I do, and I don't expect it. As a matter of fact, one of a very popular local blogger saw my videos, and he said he wanted to come to my brew pub and do a piece on me and advertise my business and also talk about my thoughts on Hong Kong, and I refused. I said no, because that cheapens my message. I don't want to make it about that. Shenzhen Daily, they want to come and do a video on me, and I might go for it, but again, I want to have some strict rules around them not really talking about my business. So I've kind of gone off on a tangent there. Back to my original point. Tying in some of my own personal experiences, in Canada, I grew up in a small town, and I did experience racism. And so I'm a little bit more thick-skinned. It didn't really affect me, and in fact, I appreciate that I went through that. It was a very valuable learning experience. And so if my kids, who are half mainland Chinese, born in Hong Kong, granted, if they experience some of this racism, I'll be okay with that. You know, it's a really great learning opportunity. I can coach them. I can talk to them. I can, you know, explain to them how this helps them learn more about themselves and the people around them. And I even had a debate with my dad about this, because I'm one of these guys who I hate people who use the race card. I hate people who get, you know, all uptight about people in Canada asking a visible minority, where are you from? Or even misguidedly asking, well, where are you really from? Even if you say you're Canadian. I don't get offended by comments like that. And I get more offended by people who get offended by it. So I've been in arguments with my dad about this, and he says, well, what if your kids experience racism? And I said, it'll be an excellent learning opportunity. But what we're seeing in Hong Kong with all of these issues is you're seeing a level of racism and then a level of excuses to be just completely xenophobic towards mainland Chinese. I mean, you've got even US politicians sharing selective videos of Chinese people doing various things that are unpleasant. There's a billion plus people here. That's not going to be hard to do. But what they're doing is they're trying to create a narrative that Chinese people are inferior. And I take issue with that. Not only because it's just a terrible view to have, but my kids are half Chinese. And when we're outside and they're speaking Chinese and people come up and say, oh, your kids, their Chinese is so good. And I say, that's because they are Chinese. I want them to grow up being proud of that part of them, that they are Chinese. And it's not just a misguided, oh, you should be proud just because you're Chinese. China really does great stuff. I mean, they're responsible for, you know, over, 25% of the world's reforestation efforts. They've sent, tens of thousands of soldiers on 24 UN peacekeeping missions. They've raised 200 million people out of poverty faster than anywhere seen on Earth. I could go on and on and on and on. But there's lots of things to be proud of here, and I want them to be proud of their heritage, especially when I know that the identity crisis or conflict they can go through being even more mixed up than I am. Now they're, quarter South American, quarter British, half Chinese. So but getting back to the point, again, I said this is going to be all over the place. Getting back to my original point, what is going on right now is such an institutionalized level of racism against mainland Chinese that it's not something they can handle on their own. This is just way too much. And it's one of the reasons we came back from Hong Kong too. You know, that my eldest son, he was going to school in Hong Kong, and after a certain amount of experiencing how xenophobic the local population was, not towards my son, not towards me, they were very welcoming to me, but to my wife, I said, you know what, I don't want our kids growing up in this environment. These are going to be their friends, and they're going to learn this from them. And we said, forget it, we're going to go to Shenzhen. And Shenzhen is a very, very welcoming place. I'll get into the dynamics of that in another video, but it's a migrant city, and everybody's incredibly welcoming here. There's actually a phrase in Shenzhen that says, 来自 Shenzhen 就是 Shenzhen人, which means once you come to Shenzhen, you are a Shenzhen person. And it really encapsulates, it really captures the essence of this city. So, my information, I'm losing my train of thought here, but I warned you that this would happen. My train of thought here about why I'm posting what I'm posting is that, one, the misinformation about China really irks me, and I want to say something to kind of counteract that argument. Most people won't listen to it, but there are some foreigners who say, oh wow, I never looked at it from this angle. And I want to continue making content like that. I have a plan to interview people, Chinese and foreigners here, about their experiences in China, and find out why they love China so much. I will mention the bad things also. It's not perfect, there are issues here, but I'm focusing on the positives right now because somebody wants to come up and say hi to me, I think. He's gone. Because there's not enough of that. In my future videos, I will talk about the negatives. No, there's no system that's perfect, but the positives overwhelmingly outweigh the negatives. And I mean, even the first 5 years that I was here in China, I still consumed a lot of anti-Chinese content. And even living here and even thriving here, I still had this really negative view about a lot of elements of China. And I would even share those views with local people. So, 没事，你是不是也做那个？是不是也做直播？
没有。
哦。
算了。
哦。
我先走了。
Oh, okay, huh? Oh. Okay, well, that was interesting. Somebody wanted to come up and just say hi to me and give me a high five. So yeah, I've completely lost my train of thought now. Oh yeah, so China. So now China, I consumed a lot of anti-Chinese content, and I even shared it with some local people. Like I used to consume, I remember Ai Weiwei's documentary on the Sichuan earthquake. I even shared it with some people who were in the Chinese government when they, I know some people who, obviously they weren't in their government capacity when they came over to visit me, and I'm friends with them, and I showed it on my projector to them, and they were like, wow, okay, but they still love China. I showed, there's a really amazing movie called To Live, about kind of the Cultural Revolution era, or that kind of Mao Zedong era, and I showed that to my father-in-law also, and he had to stop halfway in through the movie, and he said, this is too real, and he was just emotional by it, and he left. But he still loves China. I mean, he went through that himself. He was, when he was younger, he spent a lot of time trying to raise a pig. That time they had no money. I mean, my wife's family, they're just like many other people here. People were dirt poor. And he raised a pig, spent a lot of time doing it, and he sold it and got a little bit of money. It wasn't a lot, but to everybody in the village, that was a lot of money. I can't remember the exact amount. And then he was labeled a dizu, basically a person with money, and he started getting targeted by other people. And he just said, forget this. I'm just going to be a farmer the rest of my life. I'm not even going to try. So he's experienced this. There's been bad things that have happened in China, and he still loves China. My response to all of this, each time I would share this negative Chinese content to people, was like, wow, geez, the people here are really brainwashed. And then I got to a point where I'm like, what am I saying? I mean, I'm having a good life here. All of these people have money now. They've been able to buy a house. 200 kilometers of subway has been built the time that I've been living in Shenzhen. The lives of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, are just improving. I said, man, maybe it's me who's brainwashed. And then I started to kind of look at it from another direction. And when you open your eyes a little bit more and you say, okay, if China's so bad, then why is this happening, this happening, this happening, this happening? How can you reconcile this? Of course, you've got all of your propaganda about, especially about Xinjiang, but when you actually look at the underlying material and you see, where did this come from? I posted another video on this. Where does this information come from? You're like, oh, come on. Are you guys serious? I mean, I know people from Xinjiang, and they have 10 Islamic colleges. They have multiple mosques that are being built, and people just try to focus on and target any sort of information that supports their view in the opposite direction. I'm kind of going off too far on a tangent here, and that's probably something I'll save for another video. Core point: China's a really good place, and I'm going to get into that a bit more in other videos. And I want my kids to be proud of that. I want them to be proud of that part of their identity. It's not just some sort of a blind, just be proud of being Chinese just because you're Chinese. No, it's because there's real reason to be. What else do I want to say? You know, maybe I'm going to leave it here. Maybe I'm going to leave it here. I just wanted to give you a little bit of context about why I do what I want to do. And I'll reveal a little bit more about it in future videos. But yeah, I mean, if you've got any questions too, leave it in the comments. I haven't been able to keep up on my comments on Twitter and YouTube anymore, but I'll try to skim through them. But if you've got anything else I want to cover, just let me know. I don't want to make this about myself too much. Already this video is a little bit too far in that direction. But if you had any kinds of questions about China or things that you wanted me to cover, let me know, and I can see if I can make some content on it. But you know what? I'm going to leave it at that for now, and I'll see you next time. 哎，你好，这刚刚跟我说话的是这个新的朋友，跟我那个关注人打一个招呼。你觉得中国怎么样？
很好啊，肯定很好，我就是在中国的。
是 ，OK， 拜拜。
拜拜。
Guys, I just wanted to add that shot in of those guys who had come up to say hi to me to kind of illustrate how friendly Shenzhen is, and that's something I'll get into in a different video. But while I was sitting there, I was kind of looking back over my footage, and it's really disorganized, that video I put together for you, but I hope you get the gist of who I am and why I do what I do, and I'm going to expand on some of the points a little bit more later. So just to re-summarize, basically the two primary reasons I do what I do is to counteract some of the really ridiculous fake news that's out there, and also to counteract the level of shame that the foreign media is trying to teach my kids that they should feel towards being Chinese. The level of xenophobia and racism is beyond what they could handle on their own, and beyond what I had to go through even as a ethnic minority in a small Canadian town. So I'm going to finish off you guys with a shot of the Shenzhen Bay Bridge and the Hong Kong side. And actually, I'll show you my one wheel, which I'm on right now. You're probably wondering how I'm moving.